You know, I'm still struggling a little bit, and maybe others as well, that awareness is generating the world, what we perceive. There's no separate self, it's an illusion. But then...
Hang on, I'm going to just stop you there, because when we say there's no separate self, it is an illusion. These are two mutually exclusive statements. It's not that there's no separate self. Your first statement is wrong, that there's no separate self. What is true is that the separate self is an illusion. Mm-hmm. In other words, an illusion is something that is not something that doesn't exist. It's something that does exist, but is not what it appears to be. And so the separate self, there is something that corresponds to the idea myself. Everybody has the sense myself. And that sense of myself refers to something that is real. Now, the belief that that separate self is temporary, finite, located, generated by the body, that is an illusion. But there is a reality to the separate self. And the reality of the separate self is the true and only self of infinite awareness.
And has this self a free will? Is it because it's generated by awareness? So awareness is...
No, it is awareness. It's not generated by awareness.
Okay, it's awareness.
It is awareness.
So, but this...
John Smith has freedom to think... Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. John Smith has the freedom to think anything he likes. But once he puts on King Lear's costume, he is restricted to King Lear's thoughts and feelings. So he freely limits himself. He cannot think Julius Caesar's or Romeo's or Brutus's thoughts when he's playing the part of King Lear. He can only think King Lear's thoughts. So King Lear feels that he has freedom to choose what he says to his daughters, but the freedom that King Lear feels really belongs to the freedom that is innate in John Smith's mind. So King Lear feels that he has freedom, but actually his freedom is the freedom of John Smith. So likewise, that we all feel that we have freedom, and we all love freedom. Why do we love freedom? Because freedom is our true nature, and we love ourselves. We love our true nature. But the freedom that we have is not the freedom of a separate self. It is the freedom of consciousness reflected in our finite minds.
Okay, but then, John Smith, for example, then deciding to be the actor, is limiting in a certain way.
He freely limits himself in order to experience King Lear's experience. Consciousness freely limits or localizes itself in the form of each of our minds in order to realize its infinite potential, in order to actualize its formless potential in form. It's like just as John Smith has to sacrifice his own freedom in order to become King Lear. But this is not imposed on John Smith from the outside. It is John Smith himself who freely chooses to limit himself for the sake of the play. Likewise, nothing imposes this limitation on consciousness, because there is nothing outside consciousness that could impose this limitation on it. It is consciousness itself that freely assumes the form of the limitation of each of our minds in order to be able to realize its infinite potential in form. So it is a sacrifice that consciousness makes, that this giving up of its freedom, this overlooking of its own nature is the price consciousness pays for manifestation. But it does so out of its freedom.
So whatever happens in a dualistic world is, in a way, not to judge ethically, because, if there's no evil, there's no good. If there's no peace, there's no war.
Ultimately, that's true. However, we have to be careful about saying that, because this does not mean that in this relative world we can all behave exactly as we please without having to suffer the consequences of our behavior. We cannot just say, well, at the absolute level, there is no good or bad or right or wrong, or therefore I can abuse somebody, I can take advantage of somebody, I can be dishonest, no. At a relative level, we should do our very best to behave in such a way as expresses the absolute values that are inherent in consciousness, not the relative values, the absolute values of truth, love, beauty, justice, equity. These are absolute values, and as relative people, we should do the best we can to think and feel and act and perceive in a way that is representative of these absolute values.
Thank you.
Because that lovely... did any of you see that? Was it shown in Germany, the film, was it The Queen or The Crown? It's called The Queen, I think. It was about the Queen of England. The Crown, was it? Did you see it in Germany? Was it? I'll tell you about it anyway. It's just really nice series on, I think it was a Netflix series on the Crown. It was about the Queen of England. And it was about her early years being Queen of England. And when she's a young queen, she's going to do her first tour of duty around the Commonwealth. And she's on the plane, the royal jet, with Prince Philip. And the Prime Minister of the day, Churchill, comes on board the plane to bid her farewell and also to brief her as to what her duties are when she's touring the Commonwealth. And so he tells her how to behave and what to say and everything like this. And then when he says goodbye, he takes her by the hand, and the last thing he says to her is this. He says, "Remember, ma'am, when people see you, they should see eternity." In other words, your job as a monarch is to stand for the absolute truth. That's your job, not to get involved in local politics. That's my job as Churchill, the Prime Minister. It's my job to get my hands dirty in everyday affairs. But your job is to stand, to represent the qualities that are absolutely true for all people, at all times, in all places, under all situations. That is your role as a monarch, is to stand for these absolute qualities: truth, love, beauty, justice, equity. And that is our job, to the best of our ability, to first of all go to our true nature, to taste the qualities, the impersonal and yet intimate qualities that are present there. And then in our relative lives, in our thoughts and feelings, our activities and relationships, to use our life as an expression of, a communication of, a celebration of these qualities. To take these qualities out into life and express them and communicate them and share them in whatever way is appropriate for each of our body minds. And each of our body minds will do it in a particular way. This is just one of innumerable ways of doing it. There are as many different ways of expressing these absolute qualities as there are people. And that is our sacred duty in life. First of all, to explore our true nature, to taste the qualities that are inherent in our true nature, but then not just to stay in our cave or our bedroom or our home, but to turn around again and then go back out into the world and to engage in activities and relationships with the purpose of bringing these qualities out into the world and sharing them with humanity.